All right, well, welcome to another Jamf webinar. Today, some very exciting content. What's new in Apple OS upgrades? Of course, a lot of new operating systems have been released and are coming from Apple. We want you to be prepared to successfully manage the rollout of these new operating systems. So, a very exciting time, both for us here at Jamf and for you as you look to empower and make sure that your end users are equipped with the latest versions of Apple's operating systems. So my name is Garrett Denny, product marketing here at Jamf, and it's really my role to sit between the engineering teams that build our software and the go-to-market teams that take our software to market. Now, as I mentioned, we have a lot to cover here today, but I want to begin with almost a cornerstone of knowledge for all of you tuning in that are maybe brand new, and this might be your first time around kind of this season of new operating systems from Apple. We'll set the cornerstone and just talk about what that means probably for your organization and why it's so critical for many organizations around the world. We'll then take a step back and look at the biggest announcements from Apple's WWDC, the Worldwide Developer Conference back in June. That was, of course, virtual this year. And then fast forward to this fall. Apple's already made available a number of operating systems, including iOS, iPadOS, and tvOS, all version 14. And coming later this year, macOS Big Sur. macOS 11, it's coming up. We're not going to do too much of a deep dive on that here today because it is future software, but we'll give a quick preview on what Apple's talked about publicly there. And then, of course, come back and join us for a second follow-up webinar later this fall. We'll go into much more technical detail on all of the features here, but especially on macOS after it's released. So we'll wrap up our time here today with some strategies for success. And again, if you are new or this is only your first, second, third time going through an OS upgrade season, that'll be invaluable for you. It's really the best way that I know how to kind of break it down in a tactical manner and to talk about the decisions that you need to make and how you can roll that out to your organization. So again, a lot of content here to cover, but a lot of very exciting things, both already launched from Apple and coming soon. With that, why don't we jump right in? Again, we'll begin with this cornerstone, OS upgrade season. And, I just love to start with this slide from Dean, our CEO, because, first of all, he's just a very gifted speaker. He does a great job. You probably saw him at JNUC, the Jamf Nation User Conference, if not in years past. You'll certainly see him this year. This is just, I think, a summation of everything we try to do around OS upgrade season. The spirit of that original iMac commercial from about 20 years ago, there is no step 3. That's what we live for here at Jamf. And so as we move through the rest of this deck, there's a bit of technical information, a lot of features and functionality. At the core is making sure that you are successful in this upgrade season. A lot of decisions need to be made. We'll talk about those here together, but at the very core of this, our driving purpose is to make sure that you look like the hero. So, love to start with Dean before we get too deep into anything else. Now, I also love to show our history of same-day support. This is something that we take a lot of pride in here at Jamf because we made a decision back in 2002, actually way before this graphic even begins, in 2002 when our company was founded. And that decision was that we would be focused exclusively on Apple. Now, every year, it seems like somebody asks in the media or somewhere else, are you thinking about broadening that focus? Maybe another platform? And the answer has been consistently and will be consistently, no, we're Apple focused. That's the core competency of Jamf. It's how we best serve you. And so you can see here, ever since 2012, we have been nailing same-day support, which means not a single delay in supporting new Apple operating systems when they become available immediately. And this is really two big benefits to you. Number one, your end users might be clamoring for that latest version of iOS 14 that just recently came out. Well, on one hand, you could make that available immediately, and that's awesome. On the other hand, you could certainly take time to test and to validate iOS, tvOS, iPadOS, and of course, coming later this year, macOS as well. So feel free to use that delayed operating system upgrades function that's built into several Jamf products. Really easy to do, but again, if you'd like to make that available immediately, you can do that as well. So with that in mind, we've talked about same-day support, we've talked a bit about what this season means. I want to talk about Apple's WWDC, because this was really, true to form, kind of the first time we got a peek behind the curtain to see what was coming this fall. So rewind with me back to June. Of course, this went virtual. First time this has ever been a virtual event, but I think like a lot of conferences, Apple just had to pivot, and they did so very successfully. I've just never seen, and this is kind of a personal anecdote, but a conference that was so clean and streamlined, but also still felt personal and intentional. A lot of conferences try to get there, and I think Apple got there. If you tuned in, you probably know what I mean. It was just a really intimate look at both what Apple's changing on the hardware side and also on the software side. And so a few big things that I'd like to touch on here, of course, beginning with operating system versions. This is probably the marquee thing that Apple announces, at least in our world here at Jamf, every year, right? And they have done this. They certainly did do it again in 2020. What are we changing in iOS, iPadOS, tvOS, and macOS, the 4 platforms that we focus on here at Jamf? Well, the answer is quite a bit, and you'll see that in just a minute. They also announced a number of expansions to the Mobile Device Management Framework, MDM. And again, if you're brand new, a few terms and acronyms in here that you'll learn along the way, have no fear, but the MDM framework is really the core way that Jamf empowers you to manage your Apple fleet. So Apple builds this framework called MDM, and they give it to a lot of different developers. Jamf is one of them. And with that, we are able to build on top of that additive things. And so the MDM framework, we love to see an expansion to that. It's happened, I think, every year, to my knowledge, and it certainly did this year as well. So exciting stuff there. We'll touch on that in just a second. And finally, of course, some really cool end-user features. Now, this is not something that you will manage with Jamf, right? There's no Memoji management framework, right? But Memojis are really cool, and they're cool because they get your end users excited about using Apple products. And I think for a lot of us, we work in organizations, we live and breathe in organizations that chose Apple intentionally, largely because end users prefer it. I mean, we have surveys that we actually had a third party, commissioned a third party to do this about a year and a half ago, but something like 70% of employees would prefer an Apple device if asked, and that's a pretty powerful statistic. Now, you think about end user features like upgrades to Messages or changes to iCloud or even a new Memoji. Those are things that make it more delightful for an end user to use and be a part of the Apple ecosystem. So we love to touch on those as well. Will you manage it with Jamf? No, but is it important to know? I sure think so. I want you to be able to talk the talk with all of your end users as things change. Now, 3 big themes that really bubbled up for me. We, of course, tuned in a lot of different Jamfs, tuned in around the world to all of Apple's keynote sessions and their breakout sessions. And I think 3 things rose to the top. Number 1, it's always operating systems. We'll go into that in detail in just a minute, so I won't elaborate here. Enterprise workflows, I think, were at the forefront in a way that, was really interesting to me. I love to see Apple investing in things like Apple Business Manager and things that do impact the enterprise. It's certainly a huge opportunity this year. There's been a lot of market change, and so seeing that investment from Apple is a really great sign to all of us in the Jamf community, because it means our work, your work in the enterprise, it's well supported and taken notice of at Apple. Now, the final thing is security and privacy. And I kind of think of this almost like a scale, right? Kind of 2 balancing weighted sides to a scale. On one hand, you have corporate security. You want integrity of your data, integrity of your network, protecting all of that personal and private customer information. On the other end, you often have this other interest, and that's the end user's privacy. And so I'll tell you, one way that we see this a lot at Jamf is sometimes people will ask, can Jamf read my texts or my emails? And the answer, just a pro tip here, is no. If you're ever asked that, that is not the purpose of Jamf, and we cannot do that. But there's a really interesting constituency here, the end user and their privacy. And I think, just speaking frankly, in 2020, this has become more important than ever because we're working from home. And with this massive shift to working from home and learning from home, you have devices that, maybe I wouldn't have thought to bring my iPhone to work in the past. Well, now it's sitting right there on the side of my work from home desk. I might want to use that for work. And so we've got this kind of balance that we maybe didn't have to deal with in the past between corporate security and end user privacy. They can go hand in hand, and I think they do very well in the Apple ecosystem. You'll see that in just a minute here as well. So without further ado, let's jump right into what I think is the main event today, new operating systems. And it seems like every fall, there's always another reason to get really excited about the latest version of mobile device, mobile operating system, or macOS, right? There's always something, and Apple finds a nice way of, I think, balancing those end-user features with things that really do change the enterprise and education. So with that, I want to give you some high points. For iOS 14, first of all, a great-looking update to the operating system. They add things like widgets to the home screen, which you can see right here, fundamentally changing how your end users will interact with iOS. But you're also going to see a few things that really change the day-to-day workflows, like app clips. This is a really interesting way that you might see developers start to make parts of their application available in a really agile manner. They can pop up and interact with a small part of an app without loading that full app experience. So it makes it very streamlined, very lightweight. Keep an eye on app clips as a technology. You might see this from an app that you rely on today. Keep an eye on release notes, I would say, is probably the best way for you to be tuned in, specifically around key applications, right? Kind of think of the top 10 or so and start watching those release notes on the App Store maybe a bit more closely, because you might see something like app clip support noted in release notes. You might also see something like a widget being available in those release notes as well. That is something that developers will be taking advantage of. So keep an eye out. I think all of those changes and more will really change, again, how your end users interact with these devices. And maybe that's a reason that you continue to see Apple adoption. Keep an eye on this in your organization. A few other things here that I'm calling out: being able to pin text conversations to the top in messages and picture-in-picture video. These, again, are just things that are kind of, I call them quality of life updates, right? If I'm a user that has already selected Apple, that I've said I want to use Apple for my work life, well, this just delights me even further. It's a way to modernize the interaction and the workflow on that mobile device. So I love it. I think, again, it takes it to a new level. And for those users in your org that are self-selecting as Apple users, they will love this. Now, what about tablets? Well, last year we saw something really interesting. Apple actually made a fork in their operating system for mobile devices. Previously, iOS powered both mobile phones and their tablet lineup. And then last year, they got on stage again at WWDC, and they said, look, we're actually thinking of iPad in a new way. We think it is such a standalone experience that we could build a better end-user experience if we split that code base and ultimately really invested in things that made iPad great on its own. Didn't try to make it kind of the best of both worlds, but made it a specialized tool. And so that's exactly what they did. iPadOS was born last year. It was just called iPadOS. This year, it's joining that same nomenclature with the 14. iPadOS 14 is now available. Now, a couple of cool things here. I want to call out, first of all, the second bullet point on this slide, the revamped sidebar, because I think for a lot of your users that rely on iPad for day-to-day work, and they're really using it for email, maybe FaceTime or Zoom, calendar functionality, editing documents. They've got maybe the mobile applications from Microsoft on there, whatever the case may be. If you're using this as your daily driver, as it were, you are going to love the revamped sidebar with new widget support. I think both of those things combined create an interface when the iPad is in landscape mode that just make it much easier to move around. I've used this already a number of times, and I think it's really indispensable. I can't imagine rolling my machine back or using an older machine because it's just way too easy. It's way too streamlined. So that's just one user's opinion, my own opinion, but I certainly think you'll hear from end users that they do enjoy this update because it adds so much value. Just for those day-to-day business or education users, it's really going to make their lives a lot better. Now, speaking of making work life better, compact notifications from things like FaceTime and messages, incoming phone calls, this is actually a really nice quality of life improvement. It sounds small because it's just how it displays like an incoming FaceTime call. But it really does have an impact, again, especially if you're using this thing 6, 7, 8 hours in a workday. That'll change your work life because suddenly your screen is not taken over every time you get an incoming call, FaceTime call, what have you. Instead, it's compact at the top and easily swipeable out of your way if you'd like to continue doing your work. So again, I've found that I really like this, maybe in a way that I didn't expect, because it's making it so much more intuitive to either accept the call and keep doing something and multitasking while I'm on the call, or swiping and removing that call and getting right back to work. So I love that for day-to-day productivity. You're also seeing a few things like Scribble with Apple Pencil that make it easier on the end user to use this device in a lot of different contexts. And so, again, to tie this back to work, you might see someone that loves to fill out like PDFs on iPad, right? Well, easy to do with the Files application or however you transfer files from a different device to iPad. It's now actually easier to fill out that PDF. You might be signing forms, adding a signature, making notes, whatever it may be. If there's an editable text box on that PDF, you can actually use your Apple Pencil and use handwriting in that box, and iPad will convert that into text in that text box. So again, one more small way that Apple has kind of said, we think people are using these more, and maybe in a different way, we can make that better with Scribble support and Apple Pencil. So small change, but I think an outsized impact on your work life. So what about managing mobile devices in your ecosystem? I think a lot of us come to this webinar with this question in mind. You might have a lot of iPhones or a lot of iPads in your ecosystem deployed. And look, they might be local in your city within a 20-mile radius. They might be around the world, depending on who you are and where you're tuning in from. I think a lot of things on this slide will really apply to everyone, no matter the size of your organization. And the first thing that I'll call out is streamlined setup. This is such a big deal because previously we had the ability to customize enrollment, but with iOS 14 and iPadOS 14, we can actually swing that pendulum in the other direction, meaning we can strip away additional setup screens that we didn't used to be able to skip. And so if you've got users that, maybe you look at them and say, these setup screens, A, just don't apply. Or B, maybe the users are just so used to Apple devices, they don't need certain setup screens like a brand new user would. You can skip those screens and go directly to the login window instead, getting those users set up and productive faster than ever. So I love this spectrum of enrollment, if you will, between, very high touch with enrollment customization. You can have custom text, welcome messages, EULAs, and so forth. Or on the other side of that, you can strip everything away and have a very streamlined enrollment experience, getting people right into their new iPhone or iPad and productive faster than ever before. Now, a number of new MDM commands and restrictions, coming this fall. This is always something that we keep an eye on, right? I think every year looking at new commands, payloads within the MDM framework, and ways to restrict devices is key. And there were a number this fall. You can actually find a pretty complete list in the release notes for Jamf Pro 10.24. Take a look on jamf.com and our docs DOCS website. Also keep an eye out for macOS 11, Big Sur, coming later this year when Apple makes that available. The MDM framework has expanded, and this is something we typically see every year from Apple. Very exciting to see it again. I'm not going to walk through every command and restriction on this webinar. In fact, if you'd like that, coming right around the time that Big Sur is available, we've got that technical deep dive webinar. So I'd like to invite you to either go to jamf.com and check out the release notes now, or join us for that follow-up webinar where we really get kind of nerdy in the MDM framework and take a deep dive there. The final thing I'll say is we are supporting enhancements for shared iPad. Now, this is capital S, shared iPad, the state that you can put an iPad into. This is an Apple feature, right? And so we support it within Jamf. Apple made a few enhancements available, and you're definitely going to want to take a look at this if shared iPads are important to your work. Now, a lot of shared device use cases changed this year, right? That is very obvious that if you turn the clock back to 2019, shared devices were seemingly everywhere. There was a lot of change going on, a lot of evolution. 2020 is just a different world, but if you're still in a place where shared iPad is important and you want to keep leveraging that, feel free. I mean, jump in. Shared iPad is more than supported in Jamf, and we're excited to support the changes that Apple has made within Jamf as well. So take a look there. Now, the final thing I want to call out, and I love to call this out every year, is tvOS changes. We see use cases for tvOS and really demand for Apple TVs in some really interesting industries like hospitality, in hotels, in healthcare, in patient rooms and waiting rooms. So no matter what your use case is, I think it's, again, a good idea to be brushed up on what's changing in tvOS, even if you're not connecting, for example, to a doorbell or a camera. You might be, and that's awesome. But if not, I think it still is worth noting. Doorbell announcements now supported on tvOS. Pretty cool. If this makes sense for your office, for having a doorbell connected, you can now see that pop up natively right on an Apple TV. You can also have camera monitoring live on tvOS. And they're also enhancing Control Center. So I think for a lot of us, when we're doing basic day-to-day configuration on that Apple TV, Control Center is kind of the way we do it, right? And so you will see some UI changes and enhancements to Control Center. I think that's great because, again, if your day-to-day life involves configuring these or deploying Apple TVs, that's a boon to you. And that's always a good thing. Kind of makes it a little more modern, a little easier to use. And the final thing I'd call out, again, I think there's a use case here, is audio sharing on Apple TV with tvOS 14. So you might imagine a situation where, I'll just pull out healthcare as an example. Maybe you've got an Apple TV in a patient's room, and you've got, a couple of folks that are in the room, staying over, helping somebody recover, but only one or two people want to be able to listen in to what's on that Apple TV and not disturb other people in the room. Maybe even the patient is sleeping, getting some rest, and you want to be able to tune into the TV. Well, with tvOS 14, you can have not only one, but multiple inputs sourced through that tvOS device. So I think this is great because it's not limited to a single, basically, pair of headphones. You can have multiple pairs of headphones tuning into that Apple TV. And again, if you've got a use case where this makes sense, take a peek. I think it's a pretty cool application. If I were in that situation, I would certainly enjoy that as well. So, we've walked down memory lane. We've talked about WWDC. We've talked about all of the new changes coming through iOS, iPadOS, and tvOS. And of course, macOS 11 Big Sur coming later this fall. We're going to have a lot to say about that when Apple makes that available. I want to leave you with this, though. This is maybe the meat and potatoes of the webinar here today. How do we prepare to succeed? And again, if you're new or even relatively new, this is where I really want you to take notes, because the best thing we can do together on this webinar is both leave understanding this next section. How do we prepare for success in OS upgrades season? Well, the first thing I want to say is this should really be your goal. Same-day support is more than baseline compatibility. I think you'll see that in a lot of places around the Jamf portfolio, but it's more than that. It's key feature support for those new features from Apple, and it's more than uploading a new profile on Jamf's end. We've got the beta program backing you up, brand new workflows with a lot of new features. So again, scoping expectation here, same-day support is a really big deal. And we were happy to deliver same-day support and really excited again this year for iOS 14, iPadOS 14, and tvOS 14. And we're really looking forward to macOS Big Sur later this year. Now, at the end of the day, 3 core takeaways that I want you to leave with for same-day support. Delighting your end users, to let you begin to test and validate operating systems as they become available. If you're not doing this today, give it some thought. I've talked to a lot of companies over the years that say this is critical to their teams because they have so many different applications and integrations around their tech environment that they just can't afford to have break, right? And so when a new version of any operating system is available, they need to test before they make that available. And then finally, deliver those upgrades on your schedule. So the first thing is begin with scoping. And I would say jump into smart groups. A lot of you already do this. And so if you are a smart groups ninja, that's awesome. Good on you. You know how powerful smart groups can be. If not, try these 2 pro tips here. You can scope based on version, first of all. So I would hop in and try to scope a new smart group based on iOS version, and then you select less than, and then 14. And see what happens. See what pops up. That should show you every device in your ecosystem that is on a version less than iOS 14.0. Very interesting. Give that a shot if you haven't before. The final thing you can do is scope based on name. If you do want to do like a little kind of workaround here, scope based on name IP. iPhone, iPad, right? There isn't another Apple device that would really be falling into this category. iPod even would be captured here that you wouldn't want. So anything with an IP you would want captured, that's a good thing. You could also build it based on that little trick. So I like to include that. So what does this look like within Jamf Pro? Well, let's take a look on walking through the Smart Groups menu. Now, this is a computer group, but the same thing is true for a mobile device smart group. Either side, same technology. We will begin by clicking on New and building out our brand new smart group right here. And of course, choosing operating system version as our criteria, right? That's the most important criteria, I would say, of the remainder of 2020 is scoping by operating system version and making sure you understand what your environment looks like. So we'll do that, choose it as criteria and move on. And now we're here at kind of where we build this recipe, if you will, right? At the very top here, operating system, this is what we said earlier, less than, and in this case, it's still got an old number in here from a macOS version. This would be for iOS. So we would scope by iOS 14.0. And then click Save, right? This will run a report, and you'll see every device that is not currently up to date, and you can then begin making a plan to get them up to date. So again, if you need extra time and you want to test and validate across your ecosystem, do that. We've got this great thing called delayed OS updates that can give you up to 3 months, 90 days, to delay the availability of a new version of iOS, iPadOS, tvOS, and even macOS when it becomes available. So do take advantage of that if that sounds important to your organization. What does it look like to delay an operating system upgrade? Well, let's take a peek here. We're in a configuration profile. So again, if you're kind of relatively new to Jamf Pro, this is very, very easy to do. Grab a little pad of paper and just write this down, config profile, and then click New. And we're going to build one from scratch. We'll scroll down, of course, to restrictions because we are restricting something, in this case, a new version of an operating system, and then begin configuring it here. Now, on the top, you're going to go to the right-hand side and click on Functionality, and then scroll all the way down and click on Defer Software Updates for, and then you've got an option. 1 day all the way up to 90 days. Whatever fits your organizational needs. If it's just a week and that's enough time, good for you. If you need 90 days, that's fine as well. Whatever makes sense, choose that here, click Save, and you are off to the races. So here's what this might look like for you. I want to give you a real world example that you can take back to your organization. Why is this beneficial? Well, let's pretend on day 1, iOS 14 drops, right? It's available, and you're kind of thinking, I don't know if we're ready for that. Maybe I need to test this to make sure that all of the apps that my global or dispersed remote teams rely on before I make this available. Well, no problem. Let's do that. Let's say 60 days for my imaginary Garrett Corporation, right? 60 days. So I've now delayed that upgrade. It's not available to any of my end users for 60 days, and it gives me time to test and validate. But here's a twist. What happens if Apple then drops iOS 14.1? I'm still testing iOS 14. Am I kind of locked in a corner? Do I not have a path forward? Well, the good news is you absolutely do have a path forward. even on day 50, we're kind of just making this up. Let's pretend that Apple releases iOS 14.1 on day 50. So I am still testing iOS 14. Well, the good news is I can delay 14.1 as well. And let's say I choose a different interval for 14.1. That's fine. As I begin progressing through my testing of 14.1, at some point, I'll be ready to make iOS 14 available to my staff. And that's great news. The staff is going to love that. All of the new upgrades that they have been looking forward to, the enhancements to end-user features, and also the upgrades to organizational security and end-user privacy, they're all in effect. It's available, even while I continue to test and validate 14.1. And then at some point in the future, day 75, I'm ready to go with 14.1, and my second rolling upgrade is now available to my staff. Now, the biggest thing I want to leave you with is an encouragement to plan and communicate, because I know this from working in IT long enough, and you certainly do too, that the more we over-communicate, the better these things tend to go. And so, a lot of your users, they might be Apple-savvy users, right? They might have seen some of the news on a tech site about the new features coming with iOS 14 or with macOS Big Sur later this fall. They might be chomping at the bit. They might really be excited about that new version of an operating system. And so before you pump the brakes and delay that operating system upgrade, or conversely, before you make that upgrade available or even required, communicate with your team and just let them know how you're thinking about this. It's also just a pro tip in case you're not doing this already. This is a fantastic way for you to look like the hero. Step up, lead your users through a very exciting time, and kind of speak as the Apple authority in your organization. If you have any questions on this, hop on Jamf Nation. We're more than happy to interact with you there and to kind of give some guidance and pro tips. But I would just say grab the reins on this one and really go and help your teams succeed, because they're excited and you should be excited as well. So what does a workflow look like for upgrades? Let's use iOS. iPadOS would be identical. tvOS, basically the same thing. But let's walk through this for iOS mobile devices, right? Again, if you're brand new, this is going to be, I think, maybe the most useful thing you can take away from today. So Apple releases a new version of iOS, which they did, right? Early September, actually mid-September, September 15th, iOS 14 becomes available. You have a choice as the IT admin. Do you want to upgrade? Or more specifically, do you want your end users to upgrade? Now, if the answer is yes, pretty easy path forward here. You just choose your deployment path, either use an MDM command to make it available, or let your user do the updating on their own. Now, if you want the user to do it, no problem, no harm, no foul. It's pretty easy to click in, see that red badge for software updates. Really easy to make this happen, right? I think every end user that's used an Apple device for longer than a year, they've been through this once or twice, and so it shouldn't be that much of a headache. If you do want to leverage MDM, though, to upgrade to iOS 14, really easy to do so as well. Hop into Jamf Pro. This is a breeze to do. You can download only or download and install. And then again, leveraging smart groups, you can choose where that is going to go. Now, this does require supervision, but I think most of us at this point are supervising devices, especially in this remote work environment. It's kind of critical, so definitely take a look. And if your devices are not supervised and you're kind of thinking, I don't really know what to do next, again, hop on Jamf Nation. We're more than happy to help you there, as are more than 100,000 of your peers on Jamf Nation. So on the flip side, if you're thinking, well, we're not ready, right? We've talked about this. I want to defer. And maybe you've got a number of days in mind, between 1 and 90 days. Well, pretty easy here. You're checking the no box. We are deferring the update with using MDM as a configuration profile. And you've got between 1 and 90 days to kind of figure out your next steps. And so whether you're ready to make that available today to enforce that upgrade with MDM or to delay that upgrade, you've got options. And the really nice thing with Jamf on your side is any one of those options, they're all pretty easy and pretty streamlined. So I want to leave you with a few resources, and then we'll jump into Q&A. Again, use that Q&A panel. We're here live, more than happy to talk and answer questions. As long as you're willing to stick around, we will stick around as well. But the first thing I want to leave you with is if this is your first operating system upgrade season, particularly if you're brand new or maybe you're actually coming to this from the Windows side of your organization and you're saying, oh man, I've gone through this on a different platform, but I've never done this for Apple devices. Help me. This should be your go-to resource. Go to jamf.com and just look up the iPad and iOS upgrades guide for beginners. This thing is brand new, and I think our marketing team knocked this out of the park. It is so easy to read, to breeze through, to keep as a reference. Check this out. If you're kind of panicking right now, don't panic, take a deep breath, and go download the upgrades guide. It's really going to make your life easier. Now, if you want the short version, maybe the Cliff Notes, you've been through this a few times in the past, but you still want a reference guide to kind of show maybe other teammates or your boss, this is a great resource for you. The simplified iPadOS and iOS upgrade workflow. Again, jamf.com. Go and search for it there, the simplified upgrade workflow. You'll see this. I believe it's a PDF, and you'll just grab it there. And feel free to reference this for the rest of the year. It's a great thing to share around within your organization to help kind of spread the word. Here's how we're going to do this. We've got a plan. Here's our plan. Let's get ready to execute the plan. With that, wow, let's take a collective breath. That was a ton of content, and especially if you're on the newer side of this, that was a lot of brand new content. And so I'm going to stick around. We've got some other folks from Jamf that'll stick around. A lot of time for Q&A. I'm just going to hop in and start reading these one by one. Again, thanks for your time. If you do need to head out, no harm, no foul. Thanks for joining us here today. It's been a pleasure. Otherwise, I will see you in Q&A.